Hi, I'm Richard Karn, and you may have seen me on TV talking about the world's #1 expandable garden hose. Well, the brand new Pocket Hose Copperhead with Pocket Pivot is here, and it's a total game changer. Old-fashioned hoses get kinks and creases at the spigot, but the Copperhead's Pocket Pivot swivels 360 degrees for full water flow and freedom to water with ease all around your home. When you're all done, this rust-proof anti-burst hose shrinks back down to pocket size for effortless handling and tidy storage. Plus, your super light and ultra-durable Pocket Hose Copperhead is backed with a 10-year warranty. What could be better than that? I'll tell you what, an exciting radio-exclusive offer just for you. For a limited time, you can get a free Pocket Pivot and their 10-pattern sprayer with the purchase of any size Copperhead hose. Just text WATER to 64,000. That's WATER to 64,000 for your 2 free gifts with purchase. WATER to 64,000.
By texting 64,000, you agree to receive recurring automated marketing messages from Pocket Hose. Message and data rates may apply. No purchase required. Terms apply. Available at pockethose.com/terms.
Criminology is a true crime podcast that may contain discussion about violent or disturbing topics. Listener discretion is advised.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 362 of the Criminology podcast. I'm Mike Ferguson.
And this is Mike Morford.
Mr. Morford, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing pretty good. The kids are out of school now, and they're home, and it's a little bit different hearing kids laughing and screaming and fighting and stuff. So having to deal with that. But other than that, I'm good. How you doing?
Yeah, pretty good. My wife is done teaching for the year as well, so she's home during the day, and it is different just because, pretty much most of the year, I'm used to being here by myself. The kids are off at college. My wife's at work. I'm working, but I'm at home with the dogs. And so it's nice to have her home. It's just nice to have somebody to talk to during the day.
It's a little different when you're used to being alone and in a studio and recording and nobody's around.
Well, let's go ahead and give our Patreon shout outs. We had Genevieve Chica, Pauline Zelkin, and Lisa Wright. So some great new support. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much for that support. It really helps us out. For anyone else listening that would like to support the show, head over to patreon.com/criminology to get started. And just one more heads up. We recently let listeners know that we're on every major social media platform. And now we're happy to say that we finally have our own website, criminologypodcast.com. You can find past episodes, news, contact information, and more, and it's live and ready for you to check out, and we hope you will.
All right, well, we're diving right into this episode, and this week, we're talking about someone who's a serial killer, but one who's different than most of the serial offenders we've covered in the past. This person didn't stalk women, target young couples, break into houses, carry kill kits, or even prowl around at night, looking for his next unsuspecting victim. He targeted mostly restaurants and committed what could almost be classified as spree killings, the murders of at least 2 people in multiple locations. But for a spree killing, it all has to take place in one incident. Even if the killer moves through space during the murders, a serial killer is one that kills at least 3 people in separate incidents. There's also no time limit. Unlike with a spree killer, the cooling off period is what really differentiates the 2 kinds of suspects. A serial killer may have fewer victims, but there are specific and separate incidents to point to. A spree killer may kill more people, but it will happen much closer together. We're talking about the man who'd become known as the fast food killer, Paul Dennis Reid Jr. And before Reid was finally taken off the streets, he would claim 7 lives. But as you'll hear, police think that number may be a lot higher.
Early in the morning on February 16th, 1997, 2 employees were inside the Captain D's restaurant in the Donaldson neighborhood of Nashville, Tennessee, preparing for the day. It was just 16-year-old Sarah Jackson and 25-year-old Steve Hampton, the restaurant's manager, inside that morning. It was a normal start to their workday. A bit before they were set to open, a man knocked at the door. This must have been around 8:50 a.m., because a woman on her way to church saw Steve Hampton in the doorway, talking to another man who was holding a piece of paper.
The man told Steve, the manager, that he was looking to apply for a job there, so Steve let him in. Suddenly, the man pulled out a gun and told both Steve and Sarah to get into the walk-in cooler. Once in the cooler, he ordered them to lie face down. They both likely believed that they would have to stay that way while the man robbed the store, but he shot them both. Sarah was shot once in the back and 4 times in the back of the head. It was clear that the fatal wounds did not come first. Sarah tried to get up after she was shot, probably in the back. There was blood on her gloves, and one of them left a patterned imprint on a shelf where she tried to stabilize herself. Steve was shot once in the back and twice in the back of the head. The man stole what he could from the cash register before he left the restaurant. Steve's wallet, which had $600 in it, was also taken. Steve's money, worth about $1,100 today, was his rent money for the month.
At around 9:30 a.m., a man was seen walking away from Captain D's. He got into the passenger seat of a blue Ford station wagon with damage to the left front. The passerby took note of this because the car was parked oddly, facing the opposite direction of the drive-thru areas. The man was wearing white tennis shoes that were obviously pretty old and worn, even from afar. Between 9:45 and 10 a.m., Captain D's employee, Michael Butterworth, showed up but couldn't get in. The door was locked. He went to a nearby restaurant and called Captain D's, but he only got a busy signal. He knew something was wrong, so he called a coworker who had a police officer for a father. That officer showed up, and so did the assistant manager, who unlocked the door. Between 11 a.m. and noon, the bodies of Steve Hampton and Sarah Jackson were discovered in the walk-in cooler. Investigators believe they were killed with a .32 caliber revolver.
With no living witnesses, it might seem odd that we know how the man got into the restaurant that morning, but employees had a hunch that they shared with investigators, and the detectives agreed. It's the likely scenario, which is that the killer had been there the night before the murders. Just minutes before closing, a man wearing a Shoney's uniform entered the restaurant through the exit door and said he wanted to apply for a job. He was given an application and told to come back the next day, when the manager, Steve Hampton, would be in. If Steve had been told he was probably going to get a visit from this man, he would probably unlock the door for him. Even if he hadn't, the man could have held up his application, and Steve would have understood that he had an applicant. This application was likely the piece of paper that the witness had seen in the man's hand. Steve, if he was expecting, this guy to be a possible new hire, might have thought that the man seemed pretty eager and motivated too. He came by one night, showed up the next morning, application filled out and ready for an interview. It's probably easier to take care of hiring stuff when you're not also trying to tend to customers and manage an open restaurant.
The man's ploy worked out perfectly for him. People in the area, whether they were fast food employees or not, were shocked by the murders. The suspect made off with a rather large but undisclosed amount of money by today's standards. But was that really worth 2 young, promising lives? Steve Hampton was married and had 3 young children. Sarah wasn't even out of high school yet. It's unlikely that either of them fought back against their attacker, so why not rob the place and leave them alive? Had they both lived, it would have been a traumatic event, but one they could have recovered from. But to murder them when they didn't resist, did that mean that one of the workers knew the killer? Or did the shooter just want to ensure he couldn't be identified later? Or ultimately, was murder part of the plan all along? Police had to consider all these possibilities. Shoney's Incorporated, who owned Captain D's, put up a reward of $6,000 in the weeks following the murder, and lots of tips came in, but it didn't lead to a suspect.
And we said more if this was shocking. I mean, let's face it, all murders are pretty shocking. But, here we have people at work, one of them still in high school. And it always goes through my mind, when you have a situation like this where there's a robbery, why does the robber when they're pretty much getting away with what you think they would want, end up killing the people there. Now, like you said, it could have been because, let's say the person wasn't wearing a mask, they didn't want to be identified. That's always a possibility. But it could have been that murder was part of the plan.
Yeah, employees in most fast food restaurants in these situations are trained to cooperate if they're ever robbed and not put up a fight. Just give them what they want and get them out of there as fast as possible. And that's what it seems Steve and Sarah did, but yet they were murdered in cold blood. So I think this clearly to police told them they were dealing with a very dangerous person.
Life in that area of Nashville went on as normal. Fast food places didn't close. No extra safety measures were put into place at other establishments. The Captain D's murders were unfortunate, but at the time seemed like an isolated incident. Just a robbery gone wrong for whatever reason. So on March 23rd, 1997, the employees at the McDonald's in the Hermitage area just outside of downtown Nashville likely didn't sense that there was anything different or dangerous about that night. This location was more than 3 miles away from the Captain D's double murder and robbery. Since fast food places are often targeted after dark at closing, most of them choose to have several employees working at closing, the idea being that there is safety in numbers. And on this night, there were 4 people closing the restaurant, including 17-year-old Andrea Brown, 27-year-old Ronald Santiago, 23-year-old Robert Sewell, and 31-year-old Jose Antonio Ramirez Gonzalez.
Just as the 4 employees were leaving the building, a man approached them with a gun. He then ordered all 4 of them back inside. With a gun pointed at them, they didn't think twice or try to resist. The employees were forced into the office in the back of the restaurant. The man ordered the employees over to the safe. Ronald, the manager, opened the safe for the man and gave him all the cash that was inside, nearly $3,000. After that, the man herded them into the storeroom and told them all to lie down on the floor. Without warning, Andrea, Robert, and Ronald were all shot in the back of the head twice. Jose was looking right at the man when he pointed the gun at him and pulled the trigger. Jose must have thought that his life was about to end, but nothing happened. Just a loud click. The man tried multiple times to fire the gun, but again, nothing happened. Jose decided to take his chances, and he lunged at the man, grabbing for the gun. During the struggle, he felt something hit his left side. He immediately recognized that he had been stabbed. The killer was not only armed with a gun, he had brought a knife as a backup. And he didn't stop at one stab either. He kept stabbing Jose in the back, chest, face, and the back of his head and neck, 17 times in total.
Eventually, Jose stopped reacting to the blows, trying to play dead. He knew that his life depended on it. Luckily, it worked. The man turned his attention away from Jose and fled the McDonald's. As soon as Jose knew he was alone, he crawled to a phone and called 911, but he couldn't say anything. Dispatcher Dorothy Carter sent both police and an ambulance to the location. When help arrived, the door was locked. Officers had to break one of the front windows out to get inside. Jose was still conscious but in bad shape and was rushed to the hospital. Thankfully, he would survive. Andrea Brown was still alive, though badly injured. Sadly, it was too late to save her, and she died at the hospital. Investigators combed the restaurant, but there was no physical evidence at the scene that could point to the suspect's identity. No footprints or fingerprints. Investigators were able to recover multiple Remington .25 caliber casings from the scene that matched the rounds pulled from the bodies of the victims.
Detectives believe that the McDonald's attack and the Captain D's attack a month before were committed by the same person. If they were correct, you would think with this big of a score, $3,000, which is the equivalent of $6,000 today, and with fast food employees and police in the area, perhaps on high alert after 2 sets of robbery murders within 5 weeks of each other, that the killer might lay low for a bit and maybe spend some of the money he had netted, or move on to a different area. But that didn't happen. On April 23rd, 1997, exactly 1 month after the murders at the McDonald's, A man showed up at the Baskin-Robbins on Wilma Rudolph Boulevard in Clarksville, Tennessee, after closing. This was about 40 miles east of Nashville. The two employees inside, 21-year-old Angela Holmes and 16-year-old Michelle Mace, let the man inside for some reason which isn't clear. Maybe he showed them his gun and they were afraid, or he could have charmed his way inside somehow. We really don't know. But we do know that once inside, the man quickly forced the pair into his car.
Their abduction was noticed soon after it happened. The store closed each night at 10 p.m., so as usual, Michelle's brother, Craig, pulled up outside to pick her up and take her home. Angela's car was still parked in the lot, and all the lights inside the store were still on. Both of these things were unusual. The door was also unlocked, so Craig entered the store to check on Michelle. There was no one inside. The freezer was wide open, and both Michelle and Angela's purses were still there. Craig immediately called 911, and officers arrived at the store in a matter of moments. Once they searched the store, they found that a floor safe in the back office had been pulled out of the floor, and the cash register was empty. Only a few coins had been left behind. It was later determined that about $1,500 was missing. Nothing had been stolen from either of the girls' purses.
To investigators, it appeared that Angela and Michelle had been interrupted during their closing routine because the mop and bucket were still out in the customer area. LaVonda Zimmerman, a friend of theirs, was at the store with them from about 9:20 p.m. that night until around 10 when they began to close up. She recalled a man coming in just before closing and complaining about how much the ice cream options cost. According to court documents, LaVonda said the man was obnoxious and very loud with his complaints. He left a bit before LaVonda did. As LaVonda was leaving, she saw a red car, which she described as shiny, pull into the parking lot. Another witness, Jerry Perdue, who was one of Michelle Mace's friends, recalled seeing a red car in the parking lot just after 10 p.m. And a third witness, a man named George Hertenstein, was driving to work when he saw a small red car driving slowly on Rossview Road near the Baskin-Robbins store. It was around 10 p.m. When George caught up to the car, he tried to pass it because of how slowly it was going. The driver of the red car quickly turned on Union Hall Road, just one road after the entrance to Baskin-Robbins.
The next morning, the bodies of Angela Holmes and Michelle Mace were discovered at Dunbar Cave State Park, about 3 miles away from the Baskin-Robbins location. They had stab wounds and injuries to multiple areas of their bodies, and both of their throats had been slit. Both had bled to death from their injuries. Based on the position of their bodies in the park, it appears their killer marched them down to the edge of the water. At gunpoint, Michelle took her chances and ran through the woods in the dark. Angela was quickly killed, and then the suspect chased Michelle down and left her body where he caught up to her. The stab wound in Angela's neck was deep. It went all the way to her backbone, according to Dr. Charles Harlan, who performed both autopsies. It severed her jugular vein and her carotid artery. A compound wound to Michelle penetrated her backbone, changed direction 3 times, and indicated that the killer had used a sawing motion with the knife. In Dr. Harlan's opinion, it would have taken up to 15 minutes for both Angela and Michelle to die from the blood loss. He also noted that they would likely have remained conscious for up to 80% of that time.
A red car had been seen at the park the night before at around 10:30 p.m. There's a house across from the entrance to the parking lot of the Dunbar Cave State Park, and that night, people at the home recalled seeing the red car because it wasn't parked in the lot. It was just sitting there, not in any space. The headlights were also on, so they knew someone was in the car. Naturally, they watched a little bit to see if they could figure out what the person was doing. All they noticed was that at one point, the headlights changed from low to high beam. Since several witnesses had seen a red car at the Baskin-Robbins and at the park, police thought the car certainly was a suspect vehicle. They then wondered if this attack was the work of the same man who had struck at Captain D's and McDonald's. If so, this was a departure for him. He had now resorted to abduction. They were now more determined than ever to catch this killer before he struck again.
I think more if you're a fast food worker in this area, by this point in time, you have to be pretty worried. I mean, this is 3 different incidents where people are murdered at fast food restaurants.
Yeah, you would hope that your employer would beef up security, make sure they have a good security system in place, maybe surveillance cameras going, and you would think the police are probably doubling patrols and keeping eyes out around fast food restaurants at that time, just seeing this pattern that was going on.
Offer valid on standard browsers, U.S. only.
When I heard about Date My Age, I thought, really? But there I was in my empty, quiet house, my laptop on the kitchen counter, and I typed in my name. Looking for a man between the ages of 40 to 60? Sure, why not?
Date My Age is different. With verified profiles, you can feel safe and secure to explore meaningful connections with interesting and mature singles.
Date My Age made it really easy. I could join and view online profiles for free. All of a sudden, my empty house wasn't so quiet anymore. I got so much attention, it just made me feel seen and alive. Date My Age helped me start a totally new chapter in my life.
Find a friend, a lover, a partner at Date My Age. Get 60% off when you join at datemyage.com today. That's datemyage.com to connect with thousands of singles worldwide. datemyage.com.
This podcast is sponsored by IQ Bar.
Hi, I'm Will, and I created IQ Bar to empower doers like you with clean, delicious, low-sugar brain and body fuel. Millions of people rely on our protein bars and hydration mixes to win their day. Turns out Thomas Keller, Michelin star chef of the French Laundry, is one of them. We've teamed up with Chef Keller to craft a bar and hydration mix that marry world-class flavor with exceptional nutrition. Our special edition salted caramel chip bar delivers all the decadence of a fine dining dessert plus protein minus sugar and carbs. And our zero sugar yuzu mango hydration mix packs an authentic citrusy punch and a mental boost from lion's mane and magnesium. The best part? 10% of sales go directly to Chef Keller's nonprofit that supports aspiring young chefs. Great taste, great nutrition, great mission. Total no-brainer.
Go to IQBar.com today and enter promo code KELLER20 to get 20% off all IQ Bar products plus free shipping. That's IQBAR.com, promo code KELLER20.
Beautiful Anonymous changes each week. It defies genres and expectations. For example, our most recent episode, I talked to a woman who survived a murder attempt by her own son. But just the week before that, we just talked the whole time about Star Trek. We've had other recent episodes about sexting in languages that are not your first language, or what it's like to get weight loss surgery. It's unpredictable, it's real, it's honest, it's raw. Get Beautiful Anonymous wherever you listen to podcasts.
On June 1st, 1997, authorities got a break at the Cheatham County home of Shoney's manager Mitchell Roberts. About 25 miles away from Nashville, a former employee named Paul Reid Jr. showed up unexpectedly between 9 and 10 p.m. The 39-year-old Reid had been fired in February after he threw a plate that hit one of his female coworkers in the chest. When he showed up to his former manager's home, he was driving a small red car. Reid asked about how to get rehired at Shoney's, but Roberts told him that he couldn't help him. According to court documents, Reid then told him that he wanted to show him something in his car. It was a small gun and a large knife, about 8 or 9 inches long. When Mitchell Roberts saw the weapons and the red car, he knew in that moment that Paul Reid was the fast food killer.
Roberts tried to play it cool and not let Reid know that he was on to him. He told Reid that it was too late on a Sunday to talk about it, so he should come to the Shoney's the next morning. But Paul Reid pointed a gun at him and handed him a pair of handcuffs, ordering him to put them on. He claimed there were 2 people watching him that would shoot him if he didn't comply. Roberts knew that if he put the handcuffs on, Reid would lock him in the car, kill his family, and then take him to Shoney's to rob it.
Roberts slowly but surely walked back to his front door. Reid told him that if he couldn't have his job back, he wanted money. As he pretended to open the door, Roberts swung around and punched Reid. He then ran inside and held the door shut. According to A&E TV, trying to think quickly, he shouted loudly, "Hand me the gun." Even though he didn't have one, Hearing this, Reid fled the scene, and immediately Mitchell Roberts called the police. While officers were at the home taking a statement from Roberts, Paul Reid called on the phone to apologize. Roberts took the opportunity to act and told Reid to come back to his house to talk about things, and they would straighten them out. Paul Reid took the bait, and when he arrived, he was arrested by police without incident. And man, Morf, you really have to think about the actions of Mitchell Roberts. I mean, he did some pretty smart stuff here. I think number one, he knew that if he didn't act, and Paul Reid was the fast food killer, as he thought at that point he was, that he was going to die. His family was probably going to die. So he took action. But then, when he gets behind the door, he has the presence of mind to yell, "Hand me a gun." He doesn't have a gun. There's not going to be one to be handed to him. But Paul Reid on the other side of the door doesn't know that and gets scared off. But what really shocks me is that Reid calls back to apologize. And then when Mitchell says, "Hey, just come by, we'll work it out," Paul's like, "Okay." It just seems so strange, the actions that Paul Reid took based on, him being thought to be this killer with no conscience. But yet he calls back to apologize.
Yeah, it seems like it definitely clashes with the fast food killer who's been able to commit these brazen murder robberies and get away without leaving much in the way of clues. And I think it's pretty brave and heroic of Mitchell Roberts to make up his mind in that instance that, hey, if I don't fight back or try and get away from him, I know I'm going to be a victim and my family is going to be victims. And he had to know, too, if he was right about Reid being this killer, he knew what he was capable of, yet he still stood up to him and took his chances, and it wound up working out. Investigators now had to prove that Paul Dennis Reid Jr. was their fast food killer. They quickly learned that all the evidence collected pointed to him. When authorities searched his home, Reid had over $1,000 in coins spread between 4 one-gallon jugs. Each had different denominations of coins. One jug for pennies, one for nickels, one for dimes, and another for quarters. Some of the contents of Steve Hampton's wallet, including his driver's license and a video rental card, were found on the center divider of Ellington Parkway in East Nashville, about 1 mile away from Reid's home. Prints recovered from the 2 cards matched Paul Reid.
Though the Baskin-Robbins in Clarksville was about 40 miles away from Reid's home, he used a credit card to purchase gas at a Texaco station less than 1 mile from the Baskin-Robbins on the night that Michelle and Angela were abducted and killed. The receipt was still in his wallet when investigators searched his belongings. The car that Reid drove was consistent with the vehicle described by witnesses in the areas of the crime scenes. He also still had their blood on his shoes. Drops of Angela's blood were on his left shoe, and drops of blood containing a DNA mixture that could not be ruled out as belonging to either Angela or Michelle were on his right.
Fibers found on Angela and Michelle's clothing were consistent with fibers from Reid's car. Linda Littlejohn, a fiber comparison specialist with the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, later described to the court just how important this finding was, explaining that it was a very rare case that you find 11 fibers that match one source, adding to the confirmation that this was their killer, and this was the car he used to transport Angela and Michelle to Dunbar Cave State Park. The fibers that matched were not even original to his car. The fibers from the back floor mats were not standard issue for his Ford Escort. They were purchased by Paul Reid at a Walmart on March 25, 1997. It makes you wonder if his original floor mats had been stained by blood from the murders at the McDonald's, since he bought them just 2 days later. Jose, the sole survivor of Paul Reid's killing spree, identified him in a photo lineup as the killer, which was perhaps most damning of all.
And I talked more about, some of his actions, Paul Reid's actions, the night that, he interacted with Mitchell Roberts. Some of them were strange. But then you find out that, he uses a credit card to get gas at a gas station very close to the Baskin-Robbins. I mean, it seems like we're not talking about a criminal mastermind here. This guy did things that just didn't seem to make sense, or at the very least would easily lead the authorities to connect him with some of these crimes.
Yeah, I think to your point, not being a criminal mastermind, he was probably lucky more than anything, because he did leave a surviving witness, and he had been seen by witnesses talking at one of the scenes with a paper in his hand, and his car was spotted multiple times. So all that stuff together, it still took them a while to get Paul Reid in custody. So he was able to escape all those things, which shows that he had some luck on his side.
But although detectives had a lot to work with, they didn't have everything. When investigators searched Reid's home, they didn't find any shoes that matched the bloody shoe prints left at Captain D's, but they did find a photo of Reid from the year before the murders wearing white tennis shoes that appeared to be a match. Another lingering question was, what about the blue car? Seen outside of Captain D's, Reid owned a red car. Insurance records show that Reid drove a blue Ford station wagon that was damaged on the left side in an accident. Witnesses confirmed that the car they described was the same as the car in the photos from the insurance company. Shortly after the Captain D's murders, he put a down payment on a new car, using a large amount of cash, made up of small bills and change.
Paul Reid maintained his innocence despite the forensic evidence linking him to the crimes. According to court documents, he told detectives, "I am not the triggerman." According to A&E TV, when he was left alone in the interrogation room, he muttered to himself, "This is crazy. I mean, why would they do this to Paul Reid?" Investigators didn't believe that these ramblings were genuine. Instead, they thought he was trying to come up with an insanity defense. Reid would stand trial for his alleged crimes 3 separate times. He wanted the cases to be tried at the same time, but this wasn't allowed for multiple reasons. The first reason was that they were not part of the same plan or incident. Some of them involved shootings, while other murders involved a knife, and only 2 of the victims were moved to a second location. If the circumstances had been identical, it may have been allowed. But the cases were all capital cases, which can be even more complicated and go on for longer than other criminal cases, even involving murder. And it was believed that the jurors would be able to focus better on a single case at a time, rather than trying to make sense of multiple timelines and multiple crimes in different counties.
And I always like it when they have interrogation room video, especially video after the detectives leave the room, right? The suspect is in there by themselves. It's always interesting to hear what, the person says. And especially fascinating when that person starts talking about themselves in the third person. Why would they do this to Paul Reid?
Yeah, that's definitely an odd tidbit here of information. And, you have to assume that he would know that room is monitored. So it begs the question, was he doing as the police thought he was doing, of making it look like he was going to plead some kind of insanity for the crimes?
Yeah, I think most people know that those rooms are monitored for video and sound. I was watching a crime show the other day, and they left a suspect in there by himself. And as soon as they left, he stood up and just started hitting his head on the table to the point where he knocked himself out. Don't know why, but I'm always fascinated. Potential jurors had to be brought in from neighboring counties to avoid any bias caused by existing news coverage of the crimes. For the Captain D's murders, Reid was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of especially aggravated robbery. For the McDonald's murders, he was charged with 3 counts of premeditated murder, 3 counts of felony murder, 1 count of attempted murder, and 1 count of especially aggravated robbery. And for the Baskin-Robbins murders, Reid was charged with 2 counts of premeditated first-degree murder, 2 counts of especially aggravated kidnapping, and 1 count of especially aggravated robbery.
Many of the victims' parents couldn't bring themselves to attend the court proceedings. Andrea Brown's father left her room untouched and kept her car, which had been purchased the day before she was killed. Steve Hampton's oldest son associated his birthday with his father's death because they had just celebrated it the night before the murders. Sarah Jackson's parents blamed themselves for letting her work part-time. She was killed just 3 weeks before her 17th birthday. Angela's mother expressed that she would never take another family photograph because they would never depict the entire family ever again. Based on all of this, there's no doubt that these murders devastated the victims' families.
It appears that Paul Reid was planning these murders for a while before actually committing them, according to court documents in January. Just 1 month before the murders at Captain D's, Reid told fellow Shoney's worker Danny Tackett that it would be easy money to rob a fast food place in the middle of the night, specifically noting that at that time there would be no witnesses. Jeffrey Potter, another Shoney's employee, would back this up, recalling that Reid was always talking about making easy money and that he hated his job. Potter and Tackett both admitted that Reid had asked them for help buying a gun. This was also just before he got fired from his job.
Reid ended up purchasing 2 different .25 caliber handguns from a man named Robert Bolin just 1 month before the first murders. Bolin also threw in a green and yellow box of ammunition. Agent Tommy Heflin of the Tennessee Bureau of Investigations would later confirm that Remington ammo, like the casings found on the floor at McDonald's and the bullets recovered from the victims' bodies, was sold in green and yellow packaging. Bolin also recalled that Reid wanted a .25 caliber gun because he already had a .32 caliber revolver, but that he, quote, didn't like the way it shot. Reid was also looking for something that held more bullets. It was also evident that after the murders, Reid appeared to have more cash than he should have. Despite being unemployed at the time, in late April, Reid chipped in for half of the airfare from Texas to Nashville for Linda Patton, one of his friends. He also paid for her hotel, for food, and for all the things they did together while in Nashville. He also told one acquaintance he wanted to invest $3,000.
All of the evidence and witness testimony was enough to convince a jury of Paul Reid Jr.'s guilt. He was found guilty and handed 2 death sentences on April 20th, 1999. 5 more would quickly follow for the other charges. Even today, this is the highest number of death sentences given to a single person in the history of the state of Tennessee. Reid was sent to Tennessee's Morgan County Correctional Complex to await execution.
Paul Reid Jr.'s appeal regarding his conviction of the murders of Angela Bowman and Michelle Mace was denied. Along with a few other issues, he claimed that he never should have been found competent to stand trial. There had been a multi-day competency hearing just 8 days before his trial. Opinions on his mental status were mixed, but as we're about to discuss, there's some really glaring and troubling things in Reid's past that could have been a warning sign of things to come. Reid experienced some instability growing up and had difficulty in school. He was born with a deformed ear and experienced hearing loss as a result. For many years, he and his sister were raised by their maternal grandmother. When he was 7, Reid finally entered school for the first time. At a young age, he got in trouble for stealing mail and abusing animals. He was also mean to other children and didn't make many friends.
When he was 16, Reid was kicked out of his mother's home after he tried to sexually assault her, as well as his sisters. He was arrested in Texas multiple times. He was arrested as a minor for simple assault and car theft. He was arrested for writing bad checks, but paid the balance and the charges were dropped. In 1982, he committed a string of armed robberies, but was found incompetent to stand trial. He was committed to a psychiatric institution, but obviously not for long. In 1984, he was convicted of robbing a steakhouse in Houston. He was paroled early in 1990 after serving only 5 years of his 20-year sentence. While in prison in Texas, he apparently expressed remorse for leaving witnesses to his crimes, because he was only caught when a customer in a restaurant he robbed followed him and wrote down his license plate number. After being paroled, Paul Reid moved between Texas and Oklahoma, eventually moving to Nashville, Tennessee. In hopes of becoming a country music star, he went by the stage name Justin Parks, made demo tapes, and got headshots taken. His dream didn't pan out, and he ended up working as a cook and dishwasher at a Shoney's until he was fired on February 15th, 1997, just one day before the Captain D's murders. It seems that Reid stopped by Captain D's after he was fired, and after sleeping on it, he decided he didn't need to apply for a job there. Instead, he just stole all of the money in the store and killed the workers inside. So, Morf, as we talk about, Paul Reid's younger years, the years before he began killing, as you said, there are some very glaring signs here. The abuse of animals. He tried to sexually assault his mother and his sisters. And as often comes up in many cases, especially cases from, 40, 50 years ago, people are caught. They're tried, they're convicted, and they're sentenced. But they don't do or didn't do very much of what that sentence was, right? He got a 20-year sentence for robbery, and he served only 5 years. But what I thought was really telling, and you see this in some cases, that when people are caught and they realize that the only reason they were caught was because they left behind witnesses. That's the only remorse he had. It wasn't for what he did. It was for the fact that he left behind a witness and he got caught. So later on, when he decides that he's going to commit crimes, he's not going to leave any witnesses, or he's going to try not to, because he's already been down that road and it got him caught.
Yeah, my heart really goes out to the families of these victims, because having that kind of record, which he had, it's easy to wonder why he wasn't still in prison for some of that stuff and out on the street to commit these crimes. So, I wonder if these families sort of blame the system, which they probably have every right to, that he was out on the street to commit these murders and take their loved ones from them.
I think it would be hard for a family not to, right? Once they learn about some of the things in the perpetrator's past, it would be hard not to think, oh, if he would only still have been in prison.
A deeper look into Reid's past revealed even more troubling things. He apparently believed that he had been under surveillance by the government for 20 years, going back to the year 1978. That same year, he was diagnosed with a psychotic disorder. Reid described mixed feelings about this surveillance. Sometimes it scared him, and he felt paranoid, and other times he felt pride and loyalty for being part of this program. He told one doctor that he had been given doses of radiation, which created a magnetic field that allowed his body to show up on a screen at the CIA headquarters, a technique that he said had been developed by the Soviet Union.
While many believed that Reid was trying to get away with the murders by claiming fake psychiatric issues, according to court documents, Dr. Xavier Amador, a clinical psychologist, believed he was faking his moments of apparent sanity and was mostly unaware that he was even sick, something called anosognosia. Dr. Amador noted that Reid wants people to believe he is normal, which is kind of the opposite of trying to feign insanity. Those same court documents reflect that another clinical psychologist, Dr. Pamela Obley, described Reid's left temporal lobe as shrunken and distorted. After significant head injuries in 1962, 1971, 1972, and 1990. It's unclear when each incident happened, but he was said to have been hit by a car while he was riding his bicycle, fallen off of a mini bike, been hit in the back of the head with a brick, and also involved in a car wreck. Dr. Obley noted that Reid's delusions had been around for a long time. They didn't pop up as an act when he was arrested. Dr. Able did not believe he was competent, stating that his delusions also interfere in his ability to assist in his own defense. Neurologist Dr. Robert Kessler confirmed that brain scans showed several abnormalities, which included evidence of traumatic injury. Dr. Amador noted that Reid suffered from chronic schizophrenia of the paranoid type, a cognitive disorder not otherwise specified, documented brain damage, and mental illness associated with brain dysfunction.
While most of the medical experts backed each other's findings up, not all of the experts were convinced. Forensic psychiatrist Dr. William Burnett disagreed with the other professionals. In his opinion, Paul Reid was faking it. He had just been faking it for a long time. He noted a pattern of malingering and was very clear that he couldn't identify any relationship between the defendant's brain injury and the events that led to his arrest and these killings. There was also evidence that Reid had bragged about how he fooled the shrinks in Texas sometime in the late 70s or early 80s, and they had been diagnosed as malingering in some of those Texas cases.
And it doesn't surprise me at all, Morf, that you have mental health professionals who disagree on Paul Reid. You see that in a lot of cases. The one thing I will say is that it seems like this man had a number of serious head injuries. And we know from all the cases that we've done that traumatic brain injuries can have serious effects on people.
Well, when you have the history of animal abuse and things like that, coupled with head injuries that we see in a lot of offenders, it's not surprising to me that this was the outcome here for Paul Reid.
Yeah, unfortunately, that is something that we've seen in the past of a lot of serial killers. In the end, Reid ended up being found competent for trial because regardless of the delusions he experienced or any brain damage he had suffered, he did understand what the charges he faced meant and indicated that he would cooperate with his attorneys in his own defense. He did know right from wrong, but it was ultimately some of his own decisions that may have wound up working against him. He refused to waive certain privileges, making it impossible for important witnesses to testify on his behalf. Reverend Joe Engel would have testified that Reid was the most mentally ill prisoner he had ever counseled. But Reid wouldn't waive the priest-parishioner privilege. A social worker, Mary Ann Hea, who was employed by the Davidson County Public Defender's Office, could have also backed up some of Reid's claims, but he refused to waive attorney-client privilege. Defense investigator Ron Lax interviewed Reid multiple times regarding the McDonald's murders, and as such would have been subject to be questioned about that crime if he were cross-examined, so he was not called as a witness.
Some people believe that Reid didn't seem to understand that he was facing a death sentence. He discussed at times his plans for after the trial and when he got out of prison, like becoming an attorney. Most of his questions for his lawyers and doctors during the trial were focused on what food he would get to eat, not legal defenses or anything about the case. He actually at one point refused to discuss the case with his attorney. However, he also complained about the poor performance of his representation, saying that the poor defense was, quote-unquote, killing him, which would tend to show that he understood exactly what he was facing if he was found guilty.
The prosecution refuted any role that mental health issues could have played in these murders, telling the jury, this is not some crazy offense. This is standard greed. He'd rather kill and rob than work. He didn't kill Angela and Michelle because he was paranoid or delusional. He killed them simply because he wanted money. Most of the professionals did agree that his issues, whether it be a disorder, delusion, or brain damage, did not cause him to commit any of these crimes and didn't mean that he wasn't capable of the charges against him either. Reid's sister, Linda Martiniano, was a staunch advocate for her brother and firm believer that he was incompetent to stand trial. Eventually, Reid dropped all appeal efforts and appeared to actually want to be executed. One opinion piece from the National Coalition to Abolish the Death Penalty noted that Reid was operating under a psychotic belief that he is being tortured by scientific technology, and that the only way to escape the torture is to succumb to execution. According to democracyinaction.org, Reid said, "If I'm going to wake up tomorrow in prison, then I don't want to live." He also said, "I haven't had a life since 1985.
So after dropping all of his appeals, it seemed as if Reid was content to live in prison, counting down the days until his execution. Police continued to look at other crimes trying to connect them to Paul Reid Jr., and authorities wondered whether the murders at Captain D's were really his first. Looking through unsolved cases that Reid could be responsible for, there was one that jumped out at them. In 1993, the Brown's Chicken and Pasta in Palatine, Illinois, had been robbed by two people who killed 7 employees there. If Reid was involved, he had a partner who could have still been roaming around free. But it turned out that Reid had an alibi for the Brown's Chicken massacre. No matter how hard investigators tried to get the alibi to fall through, it never did. It couldn't have been him, just showing us again how truly dangerous it is to work in the fast food establishments. There wasn't just one guy in one area killing fast food employees. It was happening in different places. There was no real movement in that case until 2002, when a suspect was implicated by his ex-girlfriend. The death penalty was on the table for both suspects, but the jury wasn't unanimous, leading to a sentence of life in prison. Both perpetrators are still behind bars.
There is at least one other crime that authorities still think Reid is responsible for, even though there's no forensic evidence that can conclusively link him to the scene. On January 20th, 1997, the opening manager at a Nashville Shoney's on Dickerson Road found the night shift manager, 53-year-old Charles Thote Jr., dead in the back office. He had been stabbed 52 times. There were no tapes in the surveillance system, so the murder was not recorded. The killer fled in Thote's car. It was recovered from a parking lot just a few blocks up the street. A security camera was pointing directly at the spot where the car was parked. Unfortunately, that camera system was either broken or had been turned off at the time. This murder would have been the first in the series committed by Reid if he was responsible, and if the surveillance cameras had been operational. Perhaps he could have been stopped and his other victims would be alive. No footprints or fingerprints were found at the scene of that Shoney's, and the murder of Charles Thote still technically remains unsolved.
There's another crime that investigators believe Paul Reid committed and never got caught for. And if it's true, an innocent man died in prison due to Paul Reid's actions. On July 14, 1980, a man walked into the Fairlanes Windfern Bowling Center on Route 290 in Houston just after closing time. He had knocked and said he was having trouble with his car and that he just needed some water and he would be on his way. Then, the 4 people still inside, the manager, 2 employees, and one of their girlfriends, were ordered to lie on the floor. They did as instructed, making a semicircle with the positions of their bodies. The man made the manager open the cash register and then told him to lay back down. One by one, the employees were shot in the back of the head. Only one of them survived. Before fleeing, the man stole the wallets of the 3 men. The sole survivor managed to make his way to the phone and call his parents.
At the time of these Houston murders, Paul Reid Jr. was living there. He got married in Houston just over 1 week later, placing him in the area at the time. He would later divorce. One of Reid's friends, Stuart Cook, who was also his accomplice in multiple armed robberies in Texas in the 1980s, has provided some pretty compelling information that points to Reid as the suspect in the bowling alley murders. In 1982, Reid fired a shot during a robbery which surprised his accomplice, Stuart Cook, according to ACLU.org documents. When Cook confronted Reid, asking him why he fired, Reid explained that he had done much worse. During a robbery he had committed before, they had started working together, and mentioned having a problem while he was robbing a bowling alley out on Route 290. Specifically, he mentioned that he had shot 4 people.
Eventually, a man named Max Sofar was arrested and charged for the 4 bowling alley murders, and he quickly confessed to the crime. The problem was, almost none of the information he gave investigators matched the facts of the crime scene. He claimed he forced the victims to lie down in line, when in reality, they were in a semicircle. And just about every detail he told investigators that was true and accurate had already been reported in the newspapers. Sofar would later admit that he was lying. First, to try to get the reward money in the case, and then later to try to get out of a different, although much less serious charge. Still, a jury found him guilty. He was sentenced to death. Sofar died of complications from liver cancer at age 60 after spending 35 years on death row.
If Paul Reid Jr. was really the bowling alley killer and left Max Sofar to die in prison, paying for his crimes, then Reid took that secret to the grave. And like Max Sofar, he would die in prison, but not due to execution. Paul Dennis Reid died on November 1st, 2013. The 55-year-old had been at Nashville General Hospital for 2 weeks, battling pneumonia and experiencing heart failure, among other health issues. The legacy he leaves behind is one of infamy and terror for the Nashville area. And if some of these other cases are connected to him, it may extend much further beyond the state of Tennessee. I think, Morf, as we wrap this one up, the big problem with Paul Reid Jr., as it is with many killers, is that we may never truly know the level of his dark deeds. I mean, we know that he committed these murders in Tennessee, but we also know that he lived in Texas, he lived in Oklahoma, he committed crimes out there. It's pretty hard to believe that he probably didn't commit murders in some of those states as well.
With this kind of lengthy rap sheet, you would think there's not going to be a lot of instances where there's big stretches where he's not committing robberies. So you have to wonder, are there ones that just were never connected to him?
Well, there's no doubt. I mean, the murders he committed in Tennessee, they were so senseless, as most murders are, but these in particular, we kind of talked about it earlier on. It seems to me this was a guy in Paul Reid who was looking for fast, easy money. He'd been fired from his job. I don't think he really wanted to work that much anyway, but it seems to me that he could have gotten this money. He could have committed these robberies without killing all of these people. I go back to what he apparently expressed to someone early on, that he only got caught because he had left a witness alive. So it seems to me at a certain point, Morf, he made the decision that when he was going to commit robberies, he wasn't going to leave anybody alive. Anyone who could identify him, anyone who could give police a description or, his license plate number, because that's what had gotten him caught before.
And I go back to these robberies being obviously financial gain is a motive, but sort of, as you mentioned, why kill these people? Why not just take the money and get out? Why not go in with a ski mask maybe so you can't be identified and get out? And to me, it makes me think he wanted to kill people and the financial gain was just a bonus in it. And that's really, really frightening.
And I think you have to discuss Reid's mental state. It came up big in his trial. They ultimately found him competent. I don't doubt that he had some mental issues, some mental health issues. The number of head injuries, the different, diagnoses that he had from health professionals. Now, whether that meant he was competent or not to stand trial, that's not for me to say, but it does seem to me that there's little doubt that he had some stuff going on.
Yeah, and Mitchell Roberts, his ex-manager that he had the confrontation with at his house, to me is a hero in this story, because if he doesn't stop him at that moment, and get the police involved and ultimately arrest Reid. He himself may have become a victim, and Paul Reid may have gone on killing other people. So there may have been even more victims. I think he eventually would have been caught because there were a lot of clues. His car, damage on the car. He was seen in a Shoney's uniform. So I think eventually enough was going in the favor of police. They would have got onto him, but the actions of Mitchell Roberts really sped things up for them arresting him.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, you have to talk about Mitchell Roberts as being a hero, because I think ultimately he did save lives. I don't think Paul Reid Jr. was a guy who was just going to stop on his own. You know, he had to be stopped or he was going to continue to rob and kill. But that's it for our episode on Paul Reid Jr. If you love the show, I haven't done so yet, take a minute, go out, leave us a review, leave us a rating. Also, keep telling your friends. Word of mouth about the podcast really helps us out.
And remember to check out all of our social media on whatever platform you like interacting on. We also have a Facebook discussion group if you want to interact with other listeners. That's Criminology Podcast Discussion and Fans. And remember, check out our new website, criminologypodcast.com.
So that's it for another episode of Criminology, but Morf and I will be back with all of you next Saturday night with a brand new episode. So until then, for Mike
and Morf,
we'll talk to you next week.
Take care, everyone.